In this video, we'll examine the physical and chemical properties and changes. First, let's compare chemical and physical properties. When we talk about chemical and physical properties, that's the property of matter and their characteristics that give each substance its unique identity. So when we look at the properties, we're really looking at what makes a substance and how it's different from something else. So when you first look at the physical properties, that can be observed without changing the substance. So we can look at a physical property and not destroy our substance or lose it. Examples of physical properties are the boiling point, the density, the mass of an object or the mass of a substance, the volume it takes up. All those would be considered physical properties. They're properties we can look at, they're properties we can measure. And now when we look at chemical properties, those can only be observed when we're doing a chemical reaction. So when a substance gets changed into another substance. Examples of chemical properties are how flammable something is, so its flammability, the corrosiveness, how much it reacts with an acid, how reactive it is. All those are chemical properties because they come about after we do a chemical reaction on the substance. And there's something we can observe only when we're doing a chemical reaction. Examples of chemical and physical properties. A physical property might be the fact that metal can easily be shaped into sheets like copper here, or it can be shaped into wires like copper wires. Another chemical property of copper is that it can be melted down and mixed with zinc to form brass. And its density is 8.95 grams per centimeter cubed. Melting point is 1083 degrees Celsius. Boiling point, 2570 degrees Celsius. All of those would be considered physical properties because I don't have to change the copper or destroy it in order to find out what these physical properties are. But now if we look at the chemical properties of copper, the fact that it starts to form a blue-green carbonate when it's exposed to air, it goes from being our shiny metal to kind of a bluish green color. That's a chemical property. When I add it to nitric acid and it reacts with it, that would be a chemical property. That's its reactivity to acid. Or when you take a piece of copper and you mix it in ammonia, it's going to form a really dark blue solution because we have to take the copper and react it with the ammonia before we can get that dark blue solution. So that's a chemical property. Now that we've seen what a chemical and physical property is, let's look at a chemical and physical change. A physical change is when there's a change in the matter, but it doesn't change its composition. So an example is a change of state. Does it go from a gas to a liquid? That would be a physical change. A change in temperature. Did the substance go from 20 degrees Celsius up to 80 degrees? That would be a physical change. Or the volume, you might add more, you're physically changing the amount. So physical change can result in a different form of the same substance, but we didn't change the chemical structure or nature of that substance. A chemical change, however, is when we get a new substance. So chemical changes always result in the formation of a new substance. An example is a combustion. You take gasoline in your car, it does a combustion, gives you energy, and turns into carbon dioxide and water. Another example of chemical change is oxidation, or you can have a decomposition. So remember, a physical change, you're just changing the form of the substance. A chemical change, you're actually creating a new substance. So looking at a couple examples of physical and chemical changes involving water. When we have a physical change in water, it can go from a solid water, ice, and if you heat it up enough, it's going to change its state, it's going to change its temperature and its state. So it's going to change from 0 degrees Celsius when it's ice to above 0 degrees Celsius when it becomes water. And it's going to change from a solid into a liquid. A chemical change, however, is if we run an electric current with water, we can start to decompose it. You can turn water from H2O into just oxygen, and hydrogen. So you're actually changing the chemical structure of it and creating a new substance. That would be a chemical change. Now that we've learned a little bit about chemical and physical properties and chemical and physical changes, let's practice this knowledge a bit. So for example, if I say that a copper solution is blue, would you think that's a chemical or physical property or change? Since we're talking about the color of the solution, that would be a physical property. If I describe that water is freezing, if water is freezing, what would you think that is? Well, our water is going from a liquid state into a solid state. So that would be a physical change. And the next example is if I take copper sulfate and dissolve it in water, what would you think that is? So having copper sulfate go from a solid state to now it's dissolved in water, it's becoming a solution. We're not actually destroying the copper sulfate or changing its chemical composition. It's just going from a solid state into an aqueous state. So that means it's another physical change. And then if I describe hydrochloric acid, HCl, as being a strong acid, what I'm doing is I'm describing a chemical property about it. Being a strong acid is a chemical property. Next, let's say you left your milk in the fridge too long and it turns sour. So milk turning sour. What's happening is the milk is actually going through a chemical change at that point. And the lactate is converting over to lactic acid to turn sour. So that's actually a chemical change. And then next, if I take hydrogen and I'm reacting it with oxygen, it's getting converted or it's changing its chemical composition. So that means we're going through a chemical change. And then finally, if I tell you that the density of water is 1.0 grams per milliliter, what I'm describing to you is a physical property of water. So now you should be familiar with chemical and physical properties and changes and be able to distinguish between all four of those.